Good evening. Thank you for coming. It's nice to see your faces here. I'm Novian Witsit, and I teach in the departments of English and Identity Studies. And welcome to what was supposed to be the keynote address for Black History Month. Bad weather came our way, sabotaged our plans, but we persevered, and here we are. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our special guest this evening, a prolific writer, Gary Phillips. And the title of our on-stage interview conversation is The Intersection of Crime Fiction and Social Change. Before I do introduce Gary, though, I'd like to do a couple of things. First, our sponsors. Thank you, of whom there are many. The Departments of English and Identity Studies, Campus Programming Board, the Center for Ethics and Public Engagement, and lastly, Minnesota Public Radio. So thank you to you all. We would not be here if it wasn't for your support, truly. And secondly, I'd like to do something that I believe is appropriate, which is to read a land acknowledgement statement, if you will. The land on which Luther College stands has been home to the Iowa, Sac, Fox, and Dakota people and their ancestors. As part of the neutral ground created by the U.S. government to control the movement, lives, and livelihood of Native peoples, this land was home to the Winnebago Ho-Chunk during their forced displacement from Wisconsin. The dispossession of the Iowa, Sac, Fox, and Dakota, and the forced migration of the Winnebago Ho-Chunk people was motivated by the interests of settlers, such as those who founded this town and this college. The Winnebago, during their residence here, addressed the land as grandmother. The tribe's orator, Wakan Dakora, believed his people were extended the blessing of this place by the Great Spirit, saying, quote, "We did not make it, nor could we make it so pretty and fair a land," end quote. Please honor this history and the ongoing connection of the descendants of these early residents to this place. Please also honor and care for the land, water, and resources as these residents did, like a loved and loving elder to whom we owe our life. Thank you. So Gary's work spans noir crime fiction, graphic novels, short stories, comic books, and edited anthologies. Gary was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, received his BA from Cal State LA, and moved through a number of professions. Union organizer, political campaign coordinator, radio talk show host, and teacher. All biographical accounts of Gary emphasize the centrality of his community activism and how that work served him well as he prepared to become a writer of crime fiction. Police brutality, affordable housing, anti-apartheid, gang intervention, and neighborhood empowerment were some of the issues on his plate. During the 80s, from what I can gather, he had dabbled in writing and comic book drawing, but in the early 90s, his writing took on a new level of priority, developing the series character Ivan Monk, a private detective adept at navigating racial tensions, who first appeared in the novel Violent Spring, set in the aftermath of the Rodney King beating and the subsequent rebellions. Mm-hmm. Since then, he's written other novel series, standalone works, short stories, and edited anthologies, such as The Darker Mask, Heroes from the Shadows from 2008, Orange County Noir, 2010, the award-winning anthology, The Obama Inheritance, 15 Stories of Conspiracy Noir, 2017, and South Central Noir in 2022. Two of his most recent novels are Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem in 2020 and One Shot Harry 2022, and they'll feature prominently in our conversation this evening. In addition to his individual creative fiction writing, he has also been a script consultant and staff writer for the TV series Snowfall, now in its 6th season, based on the 80s crack epidemic in South Central Los Angeles. Finally, I should add that he's complemented his literary work with op-ed pieces in the LA Times Magazine, the San Francisco Examiner, Washington Post, Miami Herald, and other newspapers. And so these are just some of the highlights that I've gleaned. I'm leaving out much. But join me in welcoming Gary to Luther
College. Well, we might want to call it a night because I pretty much was going to go downhill from there once we start speaking. But we'll see. All right, that's all good.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Did I get it mostly right? Did I leave out anything of significance in trying to sort of track your professional
I also delivered dog cages. How about that? And, and did scaffold repair. So there we go. Yeah. And was a printer. I was a printer for some years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the segment of your life where you were involved in community activism sounds like it could be a topic for an entirely different on-stage interview. Maybe just could you share a little bit about what that chapter was like, and are you still involved in any campaigns or projects currently?
More peripherally now in these years, but certainly in my early years, growing up in South Central, and in particular having, there was a particular police chief in those days, Daryl Gates, who was a very interesting cat. And he had been an acolyte of William Parker, and William Parker had been William Parker's mentioned in One Shot Harry because William Parker was the chief of police there in the 50s through the 60s in LA. And Parker helped to clean out corruption from the LAPD, but he also actively recruited white officers from the Jim Crow South to come to LA to keep the natives down. And Gates had been his driver. And then eventually becomes the chief of police and was very much a gung-ho kind of guy. Yeah. And it is not insignificant that my sort of baptism of fire as a community activist was around police abuse issues. Growing up where I did, the 77th Division was the folks who oversaw our area when I was a kid growing up, and you often heard stories of abuse by those officers of this or that brother who got, jammed up, hemmed up. You would hear it in barbershops and barbecue joints and beauty parlors and that kind of thing. And so you kind of grew up with those kinds of stories and that kind of understanding of the environment that you lived in. And so then it seemed like just a kind of a natural extension then that once I, certainly once from high school to college, certainly once I was into my college years, that as I became more, I suppose the notions of becoming more active around these kinds of issues took hold. And I sort of started out kind of more mainstream with something called the NAACP, it was the NAACP Youth and College Division, and a friend of mine who's still a friend now, he and I have been friends since grade school, was spearheading it, so I came on and worked around a little police issues with them, but I found them a little too square, a little too stated. And so then there was a more radical a group called CAPA, Coalition Against Police Abuse, and the leader of that, among the leadership of that was a man named Michael Zinzin, which is kind of an unusual name. Michael was part Dene, part Apache, and part black. And he'd come from Chicago. And he and another man named Anthony Thigpen. Michael has since passed. Anthony's still around. In fact, Anthony was the architect, ran the campaign for Karen Bass, who we were talking about, I think last night, who ran against a big-time real estate developer who outspent her. I think we looked it up. He spent $110 million to her $6 million, and she won. And she won really because she has a long-standing reputation as well as commitment. I mean, she's also the congressperson for the area. It's not like she was not involved in politics, but she comes out of organizing and struggle, and she and I have known each other forever and a day. So anyway, all that to say that to answer that question, which is to say that was kind of my formative years, and then tied to that or parallel to that, I was always reading. I also stumbled into crime fiction as a teenager, having graduated from Marvel Comics. Or not necessarily, I still read Marvel Comics. But then sort of getting into more that world. And so both those things were happening to me at the same time.
Okay. Well, it's clear, I mean, police brutality or just a study of police forces appears in many of your stories and the novels that we'll talk about later. You mentioned Marvel Comics. Maybe that's a good segue into thinking about your journey to becoming a creative writer and a writer of crime fiction. Go back as far as you like, but what were some of your sort of early years? What were you reading? What drew your attention?
Well, where I grew up, in those days you didn't read DC Comics. You didn't read Batman and Superman and The Flash because they were all too goofy. You read Spider-Man, you read the Hulk, because they had angst, so there was that. And then also because the Black Panther, which has now been the basis of a couple of very successful films by Ryan Coogler, was introduced in the pages of Fantastic Four way back in the day. And not insignificantly, it is two Jewish kids from the Lower East Side, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who create the Black Panther. So let's keep all this is all very interesting in the mix in the mill. But all that to say is that Marvel was what you read, at least in my neighborhood. And I should mention that my dad, my dad wasn't even a child in the Depression. I think my dad was a grown-ass man in the Depression. I got my little, whatever I got, $1, $2 in those days for my allowance. And to make sure that he wasn't wasting his money, he would always ask me, on the weekend or maybe on that Sunday afternoon, what was the story about the comics I read. And I think, again, he was just making sure that he wasn't, wasting his money, because in those days comics were 12 cents and then eventually a quarter, but that's how long ago it was. But anyway, just to make sure that he wasn't, throwing his money down the drain on his goofy kid. And of course, I had read these comics. I read them, backwards and back to front to back, and would tell them the story, tell them the plots. And so even as this young kid, I just started to, wasn't really articulated in my brain or anything, but of course, you look back on it and understand. Even then, I was starting to get this notion of like, how do I synopsize? How do I distill what the story was about without going over every detail and every nuance of the story? And so, being captivated by those frozen images, as well as then the word balloons and what have you. Again, as by the time my teenage years and early 20s rolled around, there was in those days what they called fandom. Fanzines are still around now, but in those days, fandom. This is before you kids had the internet and print on demand and what have you. And so amateurs would get together who had love for science fiction or comics or what have you, and produce their own. And so there was a whole raft of sort of these, independently produced comic books and that kind of thing. It was usually comic books, but sometimes a combination of you would have some kind of essay about this or that artist or maybe some interview with this or that comic book writer, and then combine it with an amateur comic strip, in these publications. Sometimes done on the mimeograph machine, which is nobody knows what that is anymore, but there was a thing that produced printed pages from the sort of these stencils, which created this purple ink and whatever. But then some of it was offset printed if you got some real money. And so I really made an effort to break into that as both a writer and an artist. As it turned out, my art sucks. So learning that, but then also figuring out, well, what I can really do is write, right? What I can really do is at least work with an artist and tell these adventures. And so then I just poured my energies more into being a writer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move on to talk about the two novels. So the two novels that they're going to feature into our conversation, we've got One Shot Harry, published in 2022, and Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem, 2020. And most of you haven't read it, so real quickly, just to set the context for both stories. Matthew Henson and the Ice Temple of Harlem, it's set in the city of Harlem in the 1920s.
The Harlem Renaissance in particular.
Right, okay, so the era is Harlem Renaissance, and so we've got the movers and shakers coming from that intellectual artistic movement in place. The central character is Matthew Henson, who was a real historical figure, a Black American adventurer, explorer, who was a part of the expedition team credited with reaching the North Pole in 1909, okay? And so the story covers his relationship with Harlem and looks at the variety of ways that he goes about protecting them and the city protecting him, too, in some ways.
But the character is reinvented, yes. I take him and remold him as a kind of pulp character.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then One Shot Harry. It's set in Los Angeles in the early 1960s, really on the eve of the March on Washington. And Harry Ingram is the protagonist. He's a Black Korean war vet. He works as a photographer, journalist for Black media. A platoon buddy of his is killed under mysterious circumstances, and he begins to investigate. And this investigation leads him all over South Central and the larger city of LA. So
the larger segregated city of LA in those days.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe these works strike me as being very different in terms of their style and genre. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you would categorize their genres and key literary distinctions.
Hopefully it's, yes, they're different, but there's a thread, and we've talked about this, and that sort of links them together. But yes, so in particular, the Matthew Henson novel, as we just said, I willingly draw on. There's a whole sort of other discussion and lecture about the era of pulp, but essentially to encapsulate it in the 1930s, before we had video games and TV, there was radio, but even before there was actually radio serials, because radio serials really don't kind of show up until 34 or 35. At the height of the Depression, there were these magazines, pulp magazines. They were called pulp because of the cheap paper they were printed on. And you could buy them in those days, again, started for a dime, and then I think eventually became a quarter. And they were publishers, Street and Smith and Condé Nast, I think, comes along then. Anyway, and they were all kinds of magazines: science fiction, adventure, romance, whatever. And sort of kind of the prototypes for what became the superheroes in comics starts in the pulps. And so there's one big character there named Doc Savage, which is even now still kind of talked about in the shadow. And then, of course, modern era or more modern era, Indiana Jones kind of draws on that tradition, and then I draw on those traditions in recreating Matthew Henson, who, yes, was in fact part of the expedition that reaches the North Pole, but never got, because of being Black, never got quite the credit and accolades that Commodore Perry did, or even, in fact, the 4 Inuit gentlemen who were also part of that expedition. And I bring back one of those guys because, in fact, part of my research showed that Henson, in fact, did learn Inuit languages and was the guy that hung out with these guys and was the one that they really bonded with as opposed to Perry. And not without, and should be mentioned, and I also mentioned in the book, both Perry, who was married, and Henson, who was a bachelor, then both had Inuit children. All right, but that's a tale for another time. But his son, I mentioned his son in the book, and there's actually another scholar who's something of a Hensonologist, and who years later went and found the two sons and brought them to America, and that's again another story for another time. So there's Henson, recreated in a pulp mold, and as you said, Novian, there are some actual historical characters who show up in the book, but it also has some outlandish, fantastic elements. Nikola Tesla also shows up, and his death ray. So it's not without nothing. Some of that is in the mix, but also I do take a real incident where there was a gangster named Dutch Schultz, the beer baron of the Bronx, and he tried to muscle in on the numbers racket, which was controlled by black gangsters within Harlem. And in particular, I use Stephanie St. Clair, who was herself, should be the subject and possibly will be the subject of a miniseries. She was from Martinique. She was of mixed race, and she was a very interesting and very strong and powerful woman of the time. And so anyway, all these figures figure into that. In One Shot Harry, as you said, Harry is a Korean War vet, and I realized only after writing the book, and little bits of my dad show up. My dad was a World War II vet. Little bits of my dad show up now and then in other things that I've written, but I realized part of Harry's personality is probably more reflective of my dad than other things that I've written in the past. And my dad has been gone for some time now. But, and so in Harry's case, Harry's just trying to make a living. He is not a pulp character. I mean, it is a crime fiction novel. It's a mystery novel. And Harry's just an ordinary guy who, one day in the war, and we sort of talk about the incident that leads to this, but one day in the war puts down a rifle and picks up the camera. And now has kind of made this living both as a freelance photographer / journalist, as well as in a process server. And he's kind of cobbled together a bit of a life for himself in '63 LA. And as you said, it's a very specific time because in April of '63, Martin Luther King does, in fact, come back to Los Angeles. This is 4 months before the March on Washington. And partly it's just to kind of help raise the profile and raise some money while he's in town. He gives a speech at what was then, we had a Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, not as famous as the one in Chicago that still stands, but it was built by the same family. And he spoke at that rally, certainly people like who just passed, Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Paul Newman, sort of the Hollywood liberal folks were there at the rally, and then there was even a reception at Burt Lancaster's house after that. Anyway, all that sort of is kind of the story, but not the story, right? Because what as you said, what the engine of the novel is when Harry's buddy comes to town, his white buddy from the service, because by the way, the Korean War is the first time the American armed forces are integrated. And when his buddy, kind of a sometimes jazz musician, comes back to town hinting at something that he's involved in, something big, and then he dies under this mysterious circumstance, this sets Harry in motion. But even Harry is not quite sure that he's not, because Harry's also suffering from what we would now call PTSD, what in those days was called, I guess, combat fatigue or shell shock. Even Harry's not quite sure that he's not making more of this than there is. Is there in fact a murder? Is there in fact something at play? And Harry sort of propels himself forward, but even he is questioning what is it that is exactly that he's looking for, and why is he doing it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Matthew Henson, arguably more pulp fiction than
Yes.
the sort of detective novel on the other hand. With these two genres, was there anything in each that you you just felt like you needed to alter or manipulate for your own purposes, like they had their limits and you were trying to do something
Sure,
different?
absolutely. It's a great question because, of course, it is this thing I think any writer of fiction encounters. So it's funny. I was doing a panel. I was moderating a panel actually the other week at the LA Times Festival of Books, and I kind of asked a somewhat similar question, which is to say, because it ties us into the notion of research, right? It ties into the notion of the factual. So it's always this question of like, how tied am I to real events as opposed to then making these events up? As an example, folks here learned about, I shouldn't say everybody, because probably some people knew about it beforehand, but a lot of people learned about the Tulsa massacre because of The Watchmen, right? So the Watchmen starts on that one episode, and it's, and all of a sudden we're in Tulsa in 1921, and people are getting firebombed from the air, and people coming into your house and shooting you in the head, and what the hell is going on? And then we reel it back, right? And so that's a real incident, but of course it's not. It has nothing to do with it. The Watchmen coming out of it, or part of the Watchmen coming out of it, has nothing. That's not real, right? That's made up.
Sure.
And so then the question then is that okay in this age of where we have to be clear about appropriation and non-appropriation and homage and what's stealing? Is it okay to use these real incidents in the context of telling the story you want to tell? We got into a big argument in the Snowfall room about this, right? About the Watchmen incident in Tulsa, and were we denigrating it? Were we just using it for cheap thrills? Or was it, So I probably come down on the side of, I think it's okay to use this stuff as long as you can somewhat get away with it. But also, I think if you're trying to be legit enough and trying to set a certain tone, trying to create a kind of pace in the story you want to tell. But others might see that as cheap manipulation, which is fine. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't necessarily think that's invalid critique, but it is something to wrestle with. So to really answer the question, in the end, I'm a teller of tales. I will probably always defer to what I need to use to tell you the story, or to show you the character the way I want to show you the character. Now, having said that, there are in fact probably some elements of historical occurrences. It hasn't happened yet, but it might just happen, where maybe I will defer, maybe I will veer away in favor of either not. I don't want to be seen as cheapening it. I don't want to be seen as denigrating it. But then again, I wrestle with this because then, as I said, I'm a teller of tales. So, isn't everything fair game? So, I guess to the extent that I examine these contradictions, these dynamics, I wrestle with them at times. And other times, I just blithely go along and write what I write.
Okay. Well, let's focus a little more on Matthew Henson.
Okay.
For a sec. You feel free to sort of expound on what you see as the sort of plot highlights, but I guess my question is, when I read the book,
yes.
And again, people are going to read it and pick up on different things.
Yes.
Like maybe some folks are going to be really into the sort of fantastic elements
Right,
of it.
right.
Me, not so much.
Okay.
I'm just a history nerd. But
Okay.
I got
Okay.
caught up in all of these names that
Yeah.
you're dropping, and it's such a rich book in terms of capturing the day-to-day energy of the community, the energy of the nightlife, the intellectuals, the artists. I mean, and even your covering of systemic racism, the ways in which police brutality plays out, the poverty, the organized crime, mostly white run. So, yeah, I guess my question for you is, was there a particular kind of research that you had to do as you prepared to write that text? Or was that just readily available to you and you were more interested in developing a sort of fantastic element to the story? Like, who are you? What's your priority in terms of putting that story together?
My priority, Noreen, is always, am I writing something that I would read? Honestly, right? In the end, if I would read it, I'd watch it. Well, doggone it, let's do it. I am cognizant that I have to be careful. I don't want to, you and I were talking about this also, about this other project, but I don't want to info dump. I don't want to have a character stand on a soapbox. I don't want to have do none of it. Because you never hear out of Queenie St. Clair's mouth, sort of hear it sideways, but you never really hear about I'm for black empowerment and blah, 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 blah. Because that would be boring, you know. And she is a gangster, and she does gangster shit. Oh, sorry, I guess they'll bleep that on the tape. And so I want to show dimensional characters. I want them living and breathing as best I can on the page. As best I can, I inhabit the characters, right? Whoever I'm writing it from their, point of view at any given moment in the book, and you try to be clear in the demarcation of who is thinking what or who's saying what. As it happens, as you said, yes, racism exists. Yes, Matthew Henson is a big deal in the confines of Harlem, and Matthew Henson knows in the rest of New York, I'm just a black man on the street. And if the cops roll up on me in 1928, well, I may not make it home, right? 2023, I may not make it home. But you can't, or I can't, have the characters so angst-ridden, so burdened by this that they are immobile. They can only live their lives. Now, they're going to live their lives at the service of my story, at least I think they do, but occasionally they sort of come and go as they see fit, right? And certain characters you fall in love with, and certain characters you follow that you didn't think you were going to follow in a given story, and you do. Sometimes maybe that takes you into a blind alley, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes you somewhere else. So all that to say is, hopefully I've layered in all that stuff you've talked about, but hopefully also too that I'm not pointing any neon arrows in any one of those things, right? That they, of course, these things, of course, affect the characters just like they affect all of us, right? But it doesn't mean every moment of every day we're talking about it. So that it just happens, it just is the world in which they exist. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Why did you choose Matthew Henson? I mean, he's one of many black folks from the 1920s that you could have chosen that, America knows nothing about. Right? But
that's right.
You chose Matthew Henson. What was the appeal of him?
Oh, I don't know. I think because I'd always been somewhat fascinated by his story for some time. And to me, he had the elements, he had the raw ingredients of making that kind of adventurer. I mentioned Doc Savage.
Gotcha.
I'm a big Doc Savage fan and this is a character from the 30s, and his adventures were reprinted in paperback in the 70s into the 80s. And so, when I'd go to football practice, I invariably would have a Doc Savage paperback in my back pocket. And Doc Savage was the prototype of the classic adventurer, raised from birth to be this kind of, icon of justice and blah, 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 and trained by this person and that person. And so some of that's, I incorporate, I use, I steal for Matthew. And so I just thought, because, and a lot of these characters are always explorers and been to different lands and foreign environments and had some sense of a world culture as opposed to just, an American culture. So I thought, well, okay, a lot of that is translatable to Matthew Henson. And so that's partly why I chose him to be the one I would retcon, I would reimagine in that mold.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Time is moving way too quickly
Yeah,
here.
it is.
One more question
Sure.
on Matthew Henson, and then we'll move on. So we had a book club that read Matthew Henson.
Oh, really?
Back in February,
Huh.
when you were supposed to come. And we had a rich conversation.
Oh,
It was
good.
scheduled for an hour, and it went way over.
Oh, right on.
And we all were highly entertained
Oh, good.
with the work.
Good.
But we weren't all on the same page
Okay.
in thinking about how we felt about Matthew Henson.
Oh, good. Okay.
Right? There were some folks who weren't quite sure if they even liked him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So what I want to ask, I mean,
The
like for
things I
instance,
learned, boy, I tell you.
we all agreed he was courageous.
Yes.
He was
Yeah.
daring. He did
Yeah.
what he had to do to take care of his Harlem
Right,
fellow
right,
citizens. But he could be quite a chauvinist, right? And,
Yeah,
and he could be bragging about his sexual prowess with a gun pointed at his head.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
he was that kind of.
Yeah. But that was just to
Macho.
piss those guys off. But yes, yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you respond?
Because I'd be peeing with a gun pointed at my. But all right, go ahead. Right.
So how might you respond to those folks who were a little reticent in characterizing him as being unconditionally heroic?
I think they're right. I mean, I don't disagree with them. But I do say, I mean, I know the scene you're talking about. I mean, really in that scene, I mean, really, he's jiving. I mean, really, he's not.
He's pushing buttons.
He's pushing buttons. He's not. Yeah. He's not. Dolomite sitting up. You know what I mean? He's not. I mean, so he's not. So no. I mean, that's interesting that the scene is seen or read that way, right? Because it is. I mean, it is. I mean, it's all about getting these guys to let him go so he can escape, and part of it is to just rile them up, and because he knows how these guys perceive him, right? Yeah. We've got this color boy exactly where we want him,
Sure.
and he's there to tell him, "F you, no you don't." Right? I'm not scared of you or your gun. And
he could have scared him in a variety of ways.
He could have. That's true. That's true. Right. Okay, sure. I thought it was funny though too, by the way. So all right. I will cop to that. I will take that. I will take that critique. Yes. I'll understand it. Okay. Yeah.
I thought it was funny too. But again, it caught people's attention.
Right. Okay. All right. That's interesting. That's very interesting, actually.
So where's the social change in the book, right? If we're talking about crime fiction and how it blends with social change, where do you see it operating in this text?
Certainly more so. Certainly we have it there within the Matthew Henson book. Certainly more so, I think, within One Shot Harry.
Okay.
Because we act particularly through Harry's. Becoming a significant other, Anita Claire.
Yeah.
Anita Claire is the daughter of, come to term, or at least within the left, a red diaper baby. She's mixed race, but her parents have a background with the American Communist Party, with activism, with organizing. So when Harry meets her, it is a different kind of person than he has met before. Now, of course, initially, Harry being a man of a certain age, in '63, he's naturally just attracted to her because she's an attractive woman. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to present Harry as like Mr. Intellectual, but he also comes to understand she's this powerful person, and this is what really, to me, helps to cement their bond. And through her, we get a sense of this kind of alternate history of Los Angeles, how social change happened on the sort of grassroots level as opposed to people being on TV giving speeches. That it was, in fact, through her folks. Her mom had been a teacher and gets red-baited out of being a teacher, and her dad worked on the factory floor. And so I wanted through them to give you some sense of how I understood organizing, how I understood community work to happen on these levels and not on the level of, again, not on the level of this sort of overview or whatever, what's that called, the 30,000 foot view or whatever the heck that's called, where you're looking down, but more like you're looking down, you're looking across, as opposed to standing outside of it and giving some sort of broad definition of what this means. But it is in fact, they took Lenin's words, what is to be done, and you apply it to everyday life. And so I wanted through them to then give that sense of what their work was and then what their sacrifice was.
Okay, okay. I think I got time for one more question, and
Sure.
then we'll open it up. And since we've made that move to
Yeah.
Watch Out Harry, this is wonderful. When I think of the book, for me it seems to like triangulate between, Harry Ingram, this Black Korean war vet who's suffering from PTSD, his finding work as a photographer and a journalist, and what that means as he's working for Black media, how he wants to make a profession out of this. And then there's his buddy, Ben, who's killed, and then this moment becomes a cipher for him into the world of like the white elite folks in town who are behind the scenes orchestrating to systemically control Black folks and the rights that they have in LA. Maybe you can riff a little bit on how these pieces fit together in the narrative for us.
I think that to start with the latter and work backward or somewhere in the middle of it, it's not just that the providers are looking to control Black folks. Yes, they are. And we know that. And then what's revealed, of course, is one of Harry's buddies has the ties to these folks. And to me, it's more of an even class orientation. It just so happens that more Black and brown folks are working class than others, maybe, or more represented, given their numbers, more overly represented. That's the better way to say it, within the working class. And so, therefore, it is both. Yes, it has both a racial dynamic and it has a class dynamic in terms of how they apply their invisible hand to the running of the city. Because it is important to them that they create kind of what the apartheid regime tried to do, which is to say, we need to create a class of Black folk who agree with us and who will essentially help us to maintain the calm and keep things on an even keel. So we don't see the rise of these militants. We don't see the rise of these Mau Maus as we've seen in Africa, this being 63, and therefore progress. We're for progress, but we're for progress at a measured pace. We're for progress within a certain confine. At least to me, that's how I envision our main guy, Winston Hoyt, the provider, seeing the world. And so when Harry comes along, he kind of upsets that apple cart. And it is not like Harry, although I think Harry is, because now he has been influenced by Anita, and now he started to read other things that he wouldn't have naturally read on his own. He is starting to see maybe a little bit broader picture, but Anita, I'm not giving it much away, but in the second book, things develop a bit more, and Anita will start to hold the key to some of exposing this, or maybe they'll both get killed if they seek to expose it.
Okay. Thanks, man.
Well, thank you.
All right. At this point, why don't we open it up and let folks ask questions, whatever you like.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for being here.
Thank you.
In Novian's Isaiah section. And our topic for our paper was actually to go over the 60s and the stuff that happened. So we watched the doc, and I heard something about the Black Panthers. There was I believe, a professor from Long Beach State. And my research question was, how did the demise of the Black Panther Party actually lead to gang affiliation in Los Angeles? So my question is for you. So within the late 60s, the 70s, and even in the 80s, so you talk
Yeah, man, that's a long answer. So the shorter part of it is certainly the Panthers have their own, of course, internal problems, and that's a longer discussion. But it is certainly clear that the energy and the drive that they provided, and they provided a structure, right, and took brothers who would have been involved in antisocial behavior, not all of them, but some. There were some brothers who were coming out of the joint and gave them direction, gave them hope. But just also like the Nation of Islam did with its programs, right? So and it's not without, it should not go without mentioning that it is important that when I mentioned Kappa, the Coalition Against Police Abuse, that I was involved in, both Anthony and well, Michael came out of the Panthers. Anthony was more his own intellectual journey, but Michael Zinzin had come out of the Panthers. So the Panthers had, so yes, the demise of the Panthers, COINTELPRO, and we can, that's again a bigger topic. The systematic destruction created by the government, but also, frankly, feeding on and promulgating what already existed within the Panther structure itself. Yes, it helps to say then, okay, where do these brothers go? But even the Crips, which was kind of not really a side, not a result of that, but certainly you could argue that some of those young men would have been Panthers had the Panthers existed. Even the Crips has started as a kind of more forward-thinking or thing than what it became. But it's also the case that those, as I said, some of those ex-Panthers also went on to do other kinds of political, social change work. So it isn't just what's the word I want? A one-to-one ratio, right? That therefore the Panthers' demise leads us to the gangs. I mean, crack does have and the effect of crack and the fact that you could make that kind of money on the rock. Yes, all these are factors, and the deindustrialization of stuff. All these are factors leading us to that, or bringing that upon us. But there's no one-to-one corollary. That's what I'm really saying. I'm not saying because the Panthers didn't exist, the gangs rose. That's only part of the discussion. Part of the equation. Sorry, part of the equation.
Yes, that is Amy.
Thank you.
I teach creative writing, and I teach and work with really talented students who write in a number of different genres. And so as a writer who writes in multiple genres and for different media yourself, I'd love to hear you say anything but say about what are the things about writing that you find you have to sort of switch up from genre to genre, but also what can you keep? What could stay? What's your home base as a writer when you're
Right,
moving from genre
right.
to genre?
I think for me, again, if I can at least, man, woman, young person, old person, child, whatever, if I can somehow understand something about that character, however I'm trying to present them, right? In the long form, in a novel, in the short form of a comic book, a panel, or a script, or a short story. Short story being the hardest, I think, right? Because you don't have a lot of room to, yeah. But at least if there's some way through dialogue or some notion that you can present about the character, even though it might seem an aside, I think then so much the better in terms of then presenting them however, whatever the media is that you're going to present them in. And so, yeah, I think that's the through line, right? That's the constant. And then, as you said, so now having had some experience, I mean, I've written scripts in the past, but those are all things that never got anywhere. But having now had the experience of actually writing something and then you see actors say it, and you see it on, TV, it just drives home the point more and more about trying to distill, right? How do I bring down, in the writer's room, we churn through a lot of ideas. As our showrunner used to say, the island of lost pitches. You know what I mean? All kinds of ideas. Last night we showed one of the episodes from Snowfall. This is this sixth and final season. And I don't know if I'm giving much away. Whatever. One of the main characters dies, and how that main character, the demise of that main character, how we got there. There was going to be this thing that was going to happen. The CIA guy was going to kill him. This was going to happen, or that was going to happen, or Franklin was going to kill his own uncle, right? And so, but we finally got to where we got to. But all that to say is that, again, it's like you've got all this stuff. Certainly in a novel, you got all this stuff that you could use. So now I got to try to figure out. But sometimes you got to go through all of it, right? You got to examine all of it. Sometimes you go. One time I was 40,000 words into a novel, and I work from an outline. So it's not like I write by the seat of my pants. Man, I work from an outline because, man, I need that safety net. You know what I mean? I need that out there. And it occurred to me what the novel was about. And then, which is great because then I could reel back and go back in and jettison some stuff and change some stuff, understanding now where I wanted that character to come out at the end. So again, sometimes you can only get there because you've expended all this sort of mental and physical labor to lay it out so that you can kind of then assess and draw it back in. Because, as you know, listen, you're going to have to, there's no choice about this. You're going to have to be your hardest critic. Because if you aren't, believe me, in the world of commercial writing, others will be. Yeah. That's right.
Yes, please.
A couple of months ago, a publishing studio in England decided to go back and rework and change some of the problematic terms from some Roald Dahl books.
Yeah.
I wondered your opinion as like an author and an activist on what that sort of practice.
Okay, I'll answer it. I'm gonna answer it. They should leave it alone, right? It's sexist. It's this. It's that. But it is, right? I mean, and so now, and this has come up around, I guess, some of the James Bond books, which I was talking about one of these, Live and Let Die. That's a racist that's a racist book, man. I mean, it's the only James Bond book that has has black characters in it, and there's a conversation, because the book was written, I guess, late 50s, right? It was filmed in the 70s, but late 50s it was written. And the book is there's a conversation between M, Bond's boss, and Bond, about why are all these black folks in Africa rising up, like as if they wouldn't want their own freedom, but they blame it on the communists. Should you change that? No. Bond is a colonialist. You should have their perspective be clear. You can't sanitize that away. And yes, Roald Dahl and some of these other writers or people trying to go back and change what Mark Twain wrote, although I think Twain was satirizing that stuff. I think he was doing something different. But all that to say is that, no, I think you should leave the text as it is. Now, do you want to have an introduction to that text and talk about why it is that way? Yes, that's fine. Just as you have now on TCM, the hosts. I was thinking in particular the black woman who's one of the hosts. I think she introduced maybe Gone with the Wind, or maybe it was some other film, but anyway, they didn't go back in and re-edit Gone with the Wind, which is, about happy slaves. Not entirely, but, partly about happy slaves. Yeah. To provide a context and to have an understanding of the era that it comes out of, et cetera, I think that's fine. But me personally, no. I would leave the text alone the way he or she wrote it. Well, that put him in silence.
Since we're on hot button topics, I'm curious what you think about AI and how it's going to interact with writing as a craft.
Well, being an old man, I'm glad I'll be checked out before our robot masters take over. But
Young people who are going to
Right.
have to deal with it,
Yeah.
they don't get to check out.
well, that's going to be their struggle. That's going to be their fight. I can't help them. I like to help you, but I've been drinking because my editor sent me a bad note. So there's an old character. This is good. This will loop me back to comic books. There's a character that only I know about because the rest of you are way too young to know about this character. It was called Magnus Robot Fighter. This was a second-tier comic book company called Gold Key Comics, and you would infrequently find their comic books, right? I don't know what their distribution was. Who knows what their distribution was? It wasn't like DC and Marvel where you could at least go to the newsstand or the drugstore in those days on the spinner rack and you would see a DC and a Marvel comic book, right? But Gold Key you could find intermittently. And I might say that this is a very interesting character. So his whole, by the way, so this is kind of interesting and foreshadowing of events today, or where we are today. He's a human who's raised by a robot. And the robot is called A1, not AI, but he is called A1. And Magnus is trained to battle evil robots. And he's a man, I'm not making this up, because he's set in the future. He's in a red chainmail miniskirt and white go-go boots. And if you think I'm kidding you, you go Google Magnus Robot Fighter and you'll see him on the cover of those books. And he would karate chop robots, because the robots in these 60s Gold Key comics were just horrible. I mean, they looked like Looney Tune robots, right? They had like little bulbous bodies, and they would have some kind of elongated telescopic neck and a big head and stuff like. But he would battle the evil robots. But the lesson was, he lived on North Am. I guess it was a amalgam of North America. It was like one big massive future city. Flying cars and everything, but humans have become too complacent. You see, they because the machines did all the work. The machines grew your food and told you your stories and did the labor that you used to do, and so then they had nothing to do but laze around but Magnus of course was a physical specimen, and he would battle these evil robots. So. To answer your question, I'm sure that somebody, sometime down the line, Magnus Robot Fighter will come along and battle the evil AI. That is what I'm hoping for. Yeah. And in fact, I might go write that tonight. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Well, maybe on that note,
Yes.
we can end. We have to end. It's been fun.
It's great.
Thanks,
It was
man.
wonderful. Thank you, folks. It was
Yeah.
great.
Gary will be doing a book signing up there for the folks who want to buy one or two, and be able to chat with Gary. So let's give him a hand. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you, Novian. It's great.
Thanks, man.
It was great, man.
right.
Wonderful. That's it, man.